Hi there. Welcome to the Lefty Knits channel. My name is Molly, and this is podcast episode number 13. Hello. Thanks for joining me today. If you're new here, my name is Molly. I'm a knitter based out of the San Francisco Bay Area in California, and on this channel I share all things knitting that have been going on in my life, recent inspirations, projects I've been working on, and any other crafty things that I have been up to and would like to share. Today I have a typical podcast episode for you, sans acquisitions, which I'm still happy about. I've been pretty good at not buying yarn recently, so I think instead of that I'll talk a little bit about some of my future plans that haven't really made it into any of my episodes, or perhaps, I guess in this case, a little bit newer, something that I haven't really thought much about until recently, and it's kind of, I haven't cast it on yet, but it's close to an impulse cast on, I guess. I found myself inspired to use a lot of the single skeins that I have sitting around that I think in many cases I bought traveling, or I bought with the intention of making something special someday. And that's involved knitting a lot of accessories, which is kind of strange because right now it's, I think, almost 90 degrees here where I live in the Bay Area. It's been extremely hot. We often have our warm weather pretty late in the year, but I think in the last few years it's been a little longer and a little hotter than usual. So while everyone else is really getting into the thick of fall, we're still dealing with some heat waves. Overall though, I'm having a lot of fun knitting these single skein projects. It feels really gratifying to get them done quickly, get them out of my stash, use up the yarn that I have, and I'm really having a lot of fun. So I think that's really all that's important, even if it's not necessarily seasonally appropriate yet. Despite the heat, I am wearing my first finished object, so let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I've talked about this finished object of mine a couple times, and it's finally done. This is the Sunday Morning Wrap by Lisa de Fruscia for Espace Tricot. So this is a free wrap pattern, and I used yarn from Bucksnort Alpaca Ranch in Alabama. I got it while traveling there, and it seems like it's a pretty niche yarn that's not really available widely or online, but it is about 200 yards per skein, and I think the skeins were about 3 ounces, which for reference, 3.5 ounces is around 100 grams. The colorway of this yarn that I used is called Shooter, and my understanding is that Shooter is the alpaca that the yarn, that the fiber came from. So this is a DK weight shawl pattern. The yarn I used was perhaps a little bit thicker, and it was meant to use, I think, around 760 yards of yarn, which I think is probably pretty close to what I used. Now, the way that this pattern works, and I've talked about this a lot, is that there's these sections of twisted rib, followed by sections of stockinette, and I believe you repeat that 5 times. Yeah, and then you finish with an extra long twisted rib section. So I actually had to make my twisted rib section a little bit shorter because the pattern recommendation was to go into the last 2 rows. You basically knit around and then, or purl on the wrong side, I think. You purl around and then you bind off the next round, or row. I'm so used to knitting in the round that it's just like natural for me to say round. And they recommended that if you wanted to use up as much yarn as possible, you could make this rib just as long as you could, and then when you had at least 10 grams left, you could finish up the knitting. So when I got towards the end, I was weighing my yarn, and the other thing that they wanted you to do was finish with a right side row. So then you would purl the last row, which was a wrong side row, instead of working in the pattern, and then just do like a regular knit bind off. I think I figured that I was using about 4-ish grams for each row, and I had like, I don't know, 20 grams left maybe, and I had just finished a knit row, so I didn't have quite enough to do 2 more rows of pattern and then 2 rows of binding off without maybe getting a little bit down to the wire, especially taking into account that you are growing by 2 stitches each row. So this is a trapezoidal pattern. Each side grows at a equal rate of like 1 stitch every right side. So it's a symmetrical pattern. I might have been okay to do like 1 more row, but instead I just preferred to make sure that I had enough yarn. So I don't know where that tiny little ball is, but I used almost 4 full skeins, which would have been around 800 yards according to what was written on the ball bands. So I think I got about like close to as much yardage as the pattern. I just ended up doing a couple fewer rows of the ribbing. It might have ended up being like 5 or so rows. I'm not totally certain. I like this a lot. It has a lot of like good drape. It's very pretty. I think it's a really nice way to use like some special yarn that you kind of want to be the star of the show. Like, of course, in this case, this isn't like exciting yarn. This is just some, well, at least not to look at, you know, it's like, it's just some white, off-white yarn, but to know that it came from these like alpacas at this small operation near my boyfriend's hometown is exciting to me. So I wanted the yarn to really be able to shine, to be able to use this yarn on its own, and I think I accomplished that, and it's pretty cozy. I do feel maybe a little itch around my neck, but again, it's like, it's hot right now. I'm not as hot as I was expecting to be wearing this. It probably will be put away from now on until we get a little bit closer to the winter, but I think bringing this back to Alabama will be great. It tends to get a little cooler in Huntsville than it is here in the Bay Area, although they've had some really interesting weather fluctuations in my couple of visits there during Christmas time, so who really knows, but this is fun. I'm happy that I made this. I think that this is a really great, super easy free pattern. So if you're in the market for a long trapezoidal shawl or wrap that uses, you know, 800-ish yards of yarn, but definitely has flexibility as many or most wraps and shawls do, this would be a great one to look at. And I'll make sure to link some of my other episodes and videos where I have mentioned working on this pattern. My next finished object is new to the podcast videos, but I did actually talk about it and work on it in my last video. And it's not totally done. It's actually still wet. It's been sitting on blocking mats for like close to a week and it's still wet. So I want to talk about it now, but I'm gonna be laying it back out to dry a little bit more. This is the classic ribbed hat by Jake Canton, I believe, for Purl Soho. So this is a free pattern. It's funny, I've been really excited about free patterns recently. I have 2 finished objects that are free patterns. My last video was about free patterns that I have made, and now I can add this to the list of free patterns that I've knit. This is a DK weight pattern, but I made it with worsted weight yarn I got at Purl's Yarn Emporium in Asheville, North Carolina. This is yarn from, I believe, a local farm to that area. So my understanding is that this woman has like mohair goats, maybe other animals. It even appears you can visit this farm, but it's like, I'm not totally sure on all the details. I think she might process and spin this herself, but it's possible she doesn't do that and then she sends off the fleeces. I don't know. Either way, she does dye the yarn herself as well. I'm like 90% sure of. So that farm is called Good Vibrations. I don't think I said that yet. And the yarn I have is worsted weight, 55% mohair, 45% merino. It's so soft, and it's listed as being 220 yards per 4 ounces, which is a little over 100 grams. I think it's 113 grams. And my hank was a little bit bigger than that. It's interesting because this composition, this 55-45 composition, seems to be a little bit different than what's offered currently by this maker, but I think there's a pretty high mohair content in all of them. I think it's 65-35, but I'm not sure whether the 65 is the mohair or the merino, but I will link her store down below if you want to check her out. This colorway that I have is called Flowing. I only bought a single skein of this because it was pretty expensive, and I mean rightfully so, but I just couldn't justify financially or in terms of space in my bag having a whole sweater quantity of this or more than one skein. So I got just one skein, and I've been really a little stumped as to what to do with it. I think that the like stripy pattern of the yarn is really pretty, but I also didn't like, because it's a little bit loud, like the yarn, it's not tonal or anything. It's very like variegated and in a semi-regular way. Like it does have this kind of self-striping effect. I've been like a little unsure because I didn't want to do like fancy texture or something that would be sort of hidden behind this pattern that's created by the fabric itself. But for some reason recently I've just like really been thinking about this skein. I guess I've been thinking about cowls and shawls and stuff a lot recently, and I was looking at things to do with this yarn and thinking about a cowl, but when I thought about it a little more, I was like, well, I don't have that many hats for myself. Like I haven't knit very many hats. I have one hat that I can think of that I know fits me. I knit some hats before that are iffy, like 5-10 years ago. This hat is like, I don't know if you can see the halo that well. You kind of can. I feel like there's just fuzz like all over my mohair, fuzz everywhere. Yeah, I like kind of impulsively cast this on like a week ago, and I finished it in just a couple days. I talked about this during my knit and chat, and I did not knit a swatch. I just started the hat and I figured I'll measure my gauge once I have a few inches. And I ended up frogging that hat that I had started and restarting, because the gauge given for the pattern is 32 stitches per 4 inches, and mine was about 28 stitches per 4 inches in 1x1 rib. My head is about 21.5 inches around, which is just into adult medium. So the fit for the adult small is 17 to 20 inches, and the fit for the adult medium is 21 to 25 inches. So obviously this hat stretches a lot. There is some overlap in some of the sizes, and like the finished circumference is much smaller because this hat is meant to stretch a lot. So because my gauge was a little bit looser and I was on the low edge of the adult medium size, I had originally cast on for an adult medium, but I decided to frog that and go with the adult small instead. And I haven't tried it on since blocking because it's wet, but when I tried it on before, it fit well. Like it was stretching, but it wasn't stretching a lot. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't like getting super loose so you could see through the hat. But this is also meant to be like double layered, more like this. Now, I usually would recommend making sure that you wash and block your swatches, but when it comes to accessories, I often just really don't do that, and I would be a little bit wary of that, but for something like a ribbed hat, it's probably fine. For reference, this is available in baby, child, and then adult small through large. What's really interesting is that when I went from knitting the adult medium to the adult small, that's a 12 stitch difference in the circumference. And this is a free pattern, so I feel like it's fine for me to kind of talk a little bit about the nitty gritty. But the yarn was pooling in sort of this like interesting zigzaggy pattern that you can see in my last video when I'm holding up the hat at the end. And instead now with the 12 fewer stitches, it kind of turned into this like semi-regular, like more stripy pattern that I definitely prefer. So that's another added benefit of having frogged it and gone down to the smaller size. Once I started the decreases, of course the pattern started to kind of get a little bit weird in terms of the way the yarn was pooling. So I'll show you the inside. I did kind of like work from the inside and the outside of the cake that I had, and like was trying to be careful about like making sure that it didn't pool too badly on any side. And you can see that there's like a little bit of pooling at certain points. Like this side is kind of more of the black and white-ish, gray and whitish yarn. This side is more blue, but like ultimately I think it turned out totally fine and I'm happy with it. But I'm also happy that I sort of put in that work to make sure that it maybe wasn't pulling quite as bad. Although sometimes it's really hard for me to tell if I've helped or hurt when I'm doing that. And I also made a pom-pom to go with it, which I haven't sewn on because maybe I should have washed it and blocked it with the hat, but I figured like I'd rather just keep the pom-pom dry. Like this dense ball of yarn is probably better to leave and not get wet as much as I can help it. I used a clover pom-pom maker I bought forever ago. I think it was the size large. As best I can tell, it's maybe the second largest one that they have, and I was a little bit worried that it would be too small, but it does end up a little bit bigger than the circumference of the pom-pom maker, and I think I'm gonna be happy with this size. Between the pom-pom and the hat, I used 96 grams or 203 yards of the yarn for this small size. And that's for a single color, of course. The pattern has some like stripe patterns and color block patterns written into it if you are interested in using multiple yarns and using their recommendations as a guide for how to stripe the yarn or create different color patterns. I'm not sure of the exact grammage I have left. I would say probably like 20 or so. And yeah, this is the ball that I have left. I forgot to measure the hat weight or the pom-pom weight separately, but I want to say the pom-pom's like at least 10 grams. So I definitely was able to use a good amount of the yarn, and I'm really happy with this project, and I'm excited to have it finished. One of my fall goals was to make a muscle burrow for myself that was in a neutral color, and while this is not a muscle burrow or a neutral color, and maybe a little less practical than like a light sport weight muscle burrow, you know, I'm happy with it. I think it'll be really fun to have. I think it's like such a pretty color, and when I go, you know, back to visit my boyfriend's family in Huntsville, or during the really cold months, if I go somewhere else snowy, visit Boston in the winter, you know, any of the cold places I might go or may end up having to live in the future, I think this hat could serve me well. There is a knit along going on for this hat right now. It's not 100% clear to me, but I think you may have to use the Purl Soho yarn for it. The recommended yarn is Cashmere Merino Bloom, which is a merino cashmere yarn. I believe that's what it's called. I will link all the details to the knit along that I can find below. It is talked about at the beginning of the Purl Soho website version of the pattern. So if this is something you're into, I would definitely recommend looking into the details and joining that knit along. It is a really well-written, easy to follow pattern. I think it would be great for cranking out a lot of like Christmas or holiday gift hats, and I might end up using it for some of my own for the rest of the year. That's all for my finished objects, so let's go ahead and talk about my works in progress. So my first WIP is the Lodestar, and this has seen quite a good amount of progress since you last saw it. I believe this is the back. Yeah, it looks like this now. I finished the yoke and I've split the sleeves off. This is a pattern by Kirsten Rivetta. It was from Pom Pom magazine issue 37, I believe. The summer 2021 issue. I've been working on this for a while. It's been something that's been on my list for even longer than that. And I am using Valley Yarn's Northfield, which is a DK weight merino alpaca silk blend yarn. I am making the 3rd size. I think my gauge it was a little tighter than recommended. I believe I was at 22 stitches for my swatch versus 21, although I anticipate that I might be a little bit looser on the whole project that I was on the swatch. This is finally getting somewhere, which is very exciting. I finished the 4th out of 8 50-gram balls that I have. So this is all that I have left of it, just dangling down. And my plan is to work on my sleeves and finish those up and then knit the rest from there. I have 992 yards of yarn, I believe, which I think is a little bit less than they would recommend. So I'll be playing perhaps a little bit of yarn chicken. I think it actually might not be like the worst length already. And it's hard for me to imagine the sleeves would take more than like 50 to 75 tops grams each. So I think I should be totally fine. But I want to make sure that I knit the sleeves to my desired length before I am playing yarn chicken with those, because that just gets really annoying. I'm happy with where it is now, but it has caused me some real strife and it's all my own. So I had to reknit the yoke 3 times before I got it approximately correct, but I went to figure out the very end where I was splitting off the sleeves and finishing these points of the front and back of the sweater, the point of the star pattern, and yeah, something wasn't right. It seems that I was short some stitches when it came time to create the point. I had to do it a little bit earlier for mine than the pattern called for my size. I don't know. That also ended up throwing off the size of the sweater itself. So I think I actually made the sleeves like 2 stitches smaller. I think I was 4 stitches down in the end, and I was kind of fudging my increases a few places. I don't know what happened, because I know basically there's this star pattern, and I've talked about this a lot, where you are creating these increases along a raglan line, more or less, to open up the top part of the star, and then you are increasing along this edge as you decrease the star. When I split at this point, I know I had the right number of stitches, but when I finished the star, or when I came close to finishing the star, I was not correct on my number of stitches. And as best I can tell, like, my star patterns, like, they were the same size. I can't see any, like, missed, like, increases or anything. So I basically decided to just roll with it, and I really just didn't want to do it again. Because I can't figure out what happened, I'm just trying to let it not bother me, and it doesn't really. It definitely doesn't bother me enough to frog it. I think when I can see a very visible difference in my stitch counts, or I can like see a mistake that I made, I will pretty much always go back and frog it, because I'd rather ensure that I'll wear the piece and that I'll be happy with it than just like cut my losses. Like, it's worth it to take that time for me. But because I can't even see the mistake, and I spent a while looking, because it's like basically symmetrical anyway, like there is an odd number of stitches like in the front and back of the sweater, which is kind of weird. So the point, I think, is like 1 stitch off from the middle, which I can't tell if that's how it was written anyway. Like, I really can't see enough of a difference or any difference for it to bother me. So I'm just kind of hoping at this point that I don't see that difference before I finish, and that I never ever see that difference, and eventually I just forget that there was something weird about my stitch count here. But I do think I'm having like a little bit of fatigue for this sweater. Like, I've had this sweater in mind since it came out. I spent a long time thinking about what the perfect yarn would be. I bought a yarn and it didn't work. I figured out that I had this yarn in my stash that I was pretty sure would work, and it has worked, but then I've had to frog it all these times, and all of this is on me. Like, this is not about the sweater itself. I think it's pretty well written, although it is maybe lacking in some things that might be like helpful on occasion, like telling you the stitch count like between your markers. Like, you know, you have markers for each of the stars, and if it was telling you at each point like how many stitches you should have like in each section, that might help. That might have helped me figure it out. But overall, I think it's really well written. It's not that hard to follow. It's probably easier to follow if you like knit lace all the time, which I don't, although I'm like probably an intermediate lace knitter. My hope is to have the sleeves finished by the next time I talk about this. We will see, but that is my goal that I'm going to put out there, and hopefully before long I will finally have a lodestar of my very own. My next whip has taken a lot of my attention, actually. I found, like I said, that I'm really enjoying using a lot of the single skeins that I have and doing a lot of these small quick projects, and there's a knit along that is associated with this shawl, which is part of, I think, why I've really found myself enjoying it. So I cast this on, I believe, after I finished the 4th ball of my lodestar, and I really haven't looked back much since then. So this is the Lost Horse Shawl by Casey Herlihy. She's a designer that I talk about a good amount on this channel. She was previously local to me in the Bay Area. She worked at Black Squirrel Berkeley and was also dyeing yarn there, some of which I bought pretty recently and talked about a few episodes ago as an acquisition. I made the Slip Snuggle cowl as well recently. I finished that up, and I've cast this on to be my next project for her knit along, which is running, I think, through the end of November. So I'll link the details down below if you're interested. You can use any of her patterns. It could be a whip that you had already started, and I do not exactly recall what all the prizes are, but I'm sure that there will be some really great ones. I'm knitting this with Ancient Fiber Arts Little Nettle Soft yarn. So that is a fingering weight yarn, and it's 68% superwash merino and 32% nettle fiber. So I bought this at Fiber Artwork in Huntsville, Alabama. And I mean, I basically couldn't not buy it when it said that there was nettle fiber in it. Like, I don't really understand, like, I don't know how you spin nettles. I don't really know exactly what that looks like. It's hard for me to imagine, but it's super cool, I think. And apparently nettles are very low impact fiber choices, so I think it's very awesome, and I was really excited to pick it up. The colorway I have here is called Orange Tiger Tabby, which is also up my alley. This is a dyer out of Calgary in Canada, and there's 385 yards in this 100-gram hank, and she does, there's a nettle DK version as well, and some other yarns that she also dyes up, so I think that's really cool. This is a softer fiber than I would have expected. I think something about nettle makes me think that it would be kind of like prickly, but I think I'm sure the superwash merino helps, but it feels pretty soft. I have knit a few things with this ball before. It's like a little bit kinky. Yeah, you can kind of see that. I haven't like stretched it out and washed it, which probably would have been a good idea, but I've like knit some cowls and then I'm running out of yarn, or I've done a couple things like that and frogged it. But when I realized that this shawl that Casey recently released was meant to use 350 to 360 yards of fingering weight yarn, I thought that that seemed about perfect, because a lot of one skein fingering weight projects are geared towards like those kind of maybe bigger skeins of fingering weight yarn, you know, the 430, 460 yard hanks. She did run a knit along for this in the late-ish summer. I believe it is a collaboration with Jimmy Bean's Wool, this release of hers. It's just a triangle shawl with an eyelet pattern. It has these sort of double eyelets running along a center decrease. I think I'm 3 repeats into the stitch pattern, and it's a pretty long repeat. Like there's quite a few stitches in the repeat, but it's pretty easy to memorize. Like I'm at the point where I'm actually not using the pattern as a reference anymore, and I more or less just plan to knit this until I run out. And I think that it's working pretty well with this yarn. I think also once I block it, it'll look, you know, better, because it's curling a little here, and the eyelets just aren't necessarily as even and open as I might like, and as they will be later. So I'm excited to see how this evolves, and I'm really enjoying it. I think I have, well, we'll keep talking about the knit along actually, but I have some more plans. So I think my hope is to finish this after I finish both sleeves of the Lodestar. This pattern is super fun, very like meditative and easy, and once you kind of know like, okay, I need this many eyelets and then I need to knit that, I need to change it this way, and you just kind of get in this groove, and it's very easy to continue without referencing the pattern a bunch. I'll link the pattern down below. I will link the knit along details down below. It's been a lot of fun. Casey has a Discord group that's been pretty active and chatty and friendly and supportive, and if you are in the market for some new cowls or shawls, I recommend checking out her patterns, and there's no time like the present when there's a knit along running. So I definitely would say if you have any interest at all in these types of patterns, you should strongly consider joining, because it's really fun. You can use any yarn, any of her patterns. There's a lot of flexibility, and we're having a great time. So I'm excited to see this as it grows. So I'm actually going to keep talking about Casey and the knit along as I transition into this final few minutes of talking about my future plans. My goal is, like I said, I think I'm going to try to finish the sleeves of my Lodestar, and then the Lost Horse, and then my boyfriend's muscle burrow, which I should probably get on. That is something I talked about in my last podcast, but I've made literally no progress on it. I think I spoke about it. My plan is to kind of mod it with a twisted rib stitch, which feels very intimidating. I'm like a little bit stressed about it, and I think like it just feels very like difficult and annoying, and I want to make it, I want him to like it, but when you have these like fun, easy projects that are growing so quickly, and I mean, I guess also part of it might be like they're for me and I feel the gratification. Not that, like, once I've made more of the hat and I get to show it to my boyfriend and he gets to try it on and we get to talk about it, like, that will be definitely gratifying itself. So it's not that there isn't joy in knitting for other people for me, but I think there's a pretty big hurdle for this. So that is still out there and still in my plans for anyone wondering. But my plan for when I finish The Lost Horse and am looking for my next Casey's knit along project, I will be using this yarn. Oh, the hank's upside down. I'll be using this yarn and making the high point cowl of hers. So that is a fingering weight cowl pattern, and I will be using this yarn from Earl Grey Fiber Company, which I believe is or was local to me here in Berkeley. I bought this at Black Squirrel Berkeley, where Earl Grey Fiber Company has a base that is exclusive to Black Squirrel, a worsted weight base. This is not the worsted weight base. This is the Darjeeling sock base. And it is a 4-ply 75/25 superwash merino nylon that is 463 yards or 100 grams. And the colorway I have here is called Moth Wings. And this I actually got on sale at one of my first trips to Black Squirrel. I was really excited to see it. I think it's hard for me to visualize exactly how this is going to knit up, but I think all of these colors are so cool together. So I think it'll be very interesting. I mean, I don't know if anybody else has this hesitation. I find myself hesitating to use like fancy hand-dyed yarn that I've spent a decent amount of money on for socks. And I mean, at this point, I'm also not that into knitting socks. I feel like I go through sock phases every winter, but like I don't wear socks even for a big portion of the year, really. And I especially am not wearing knit socks for a lot of the year. So I think that's part of it. But I also have this block that is very specific to me, and it's not like a judgy block. Like I definitely think like if you want to use your hand-dyed yarn to make socks, as many people do, and as I have also done, like it's not that I haven't done that. I definitely am not like, wow, I can't believe you would do that. But I feel like I have this sense of like, ooh, I spent all this money on it and I'm gonna wear it on my feet and it'll wear out so fast, and that kind of like it tugs at my heartstrings a little, which is silly, like, and not always something that I'm dealing with. But in the case of something like this, I kind of have hesitated to pick a sock pattern. I feel like I really want to pick the exact right sock pattern if I'm going to make socks. I thought about making a Jessie May crop, like the Ripple cami or something, but like realistically, I don't need many more knit tanks than I already have. Not that I'll never knit another one, but I don't reach for them that often. So I think a cowl will be a good choice. For a long time since moving back to the Bay Area from Boston, I've found myself avoiding hats, cowls, shawls. I was never a big shawl knitter, but I used to knit a lot of hats and mittens and scarves. And I think, you know, given that we have cooler weather in Boston than here, I kind of was like, oh, well, they're not going to be that useful. Like having a cowl or a hat isn't going to be that useful. And it's true, like I don't wear them as much as I did in Boston. Like a lot of the things I made in Boston, I wore like every day or very religiously because it was freezing and I was commuting to work on the train and by walking. Now that I've knit a few cowls, a few shawls, I do find that there's something that I actually like to wear. So even though the Bay Area isn't super cold, it never, you know, really snows or anything here, we have like a pretty wide temperature range throughout the day. And except for a few weeks, usually around October, like right now, we don't get like super hot weather. And our mornings and our evenings are often pretty cool. So growing up here, I feel like you're kind of taught to value layers. And I think that I've found ways to incorporate shawls and cowls into part of that layering. Essentially, I'm finding myself more interested in making accessories of the cowl, shawl, scarf variety than I have been in a really long time. I'm definitely excited to use this. I'm excited to use it in the high point. That's like basically there's some triangular like eyelet lacy texture details that I think will look really cool. And if I'm finding that I don't love the way this yarn looks in that, she has some other patterns that I'll probably also consider for this yarn. Other than that, I'll be focusing on a lot of the things that I spoke about in my fall plans video. The muscle burrow for my boyfriend being probably my top priority. And then I'll think about my shifty again. I have not really worked on it since I made that first swatch, so I'll have to swatch some colors for that. I'll be working on my Be Thankful cardigan, which just needs one more sleeve. And, you know, the caveat being that I'm not sure what needle size I used. anymore, but I'll get there. And those are things that you can hear more about in my fall plans video. I really haven't made much progress on that since, so I think I'll just leave that part there. I figured it would probably be good to talk about that cowl before I show up. Maybe next episode, maybe 2 podcast episodes from now, with a fully finished cowl being like, oops, I knit another cowl. So that, it's not like the most impulsive thing I've ever knit. That's all that I have for you this week. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you had fun hanging out and hearing about my finished objects, current projects, and my future plans. I'd love to hear what you are working on or what you have coming up in your knitting queue. Please leave me a comment down below. I'd love to chat. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel. I make videos. That's so creepy. Why would you do that to me? My boyfriend was out and he decided to greet me by sticking his fingers through the bedroom door like a creep. So I'm a little bit thrown off now. Enjoyed this video? Don't forget to give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel. I release videos about knitting every Friday. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.